Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that the Seahawks have a new look receiving core aside from rising star Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Can they keep their aerial attack afloat without DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett? We're going to be diving in on our latest training camp preview here on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening from Sumner, Washington, or Charlotte, North Carolina, we have a special appreciation for all of our everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in. We are now officially a week away from the start of training camp. And yes, I know rookies have arrived, but the real start of training camp is next Wednesday. So we are a week away from the 2025 season beginning. Again, who's counting? It's not like I haven't had little notebook sheets I've been pulling off every day, just waiting for the start of the season. We're going to keep diving into training camp related topics with receivers today. And then we got to look at that Mount Rushmore debate, because a lot of our listeners, they saw the post and they're like, well, why didn't you pick this guy? Or why did you pick this guy? Rob and I had slightly different lists. And so that's going to be a really fun discussion that we'll have in the second segment. And we'll continue our 90-man countdown with numbers 20 through 16, some really fun players that we're going to dive in today, courtesy of our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. In case you were, not paying attention at all this offseason to what the Seahawks had going on, it was a year of transformation at the receiver position. DK Metcalf requests a trade, gets dealt to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tyler Lockett with that $30+ million cap hit, an aging player. He's released as a salary cap casualty, signs with the Tennessee Titans. So two of the best receivers to ever wear a Seahawks uniform will be playing elsewhere. And interestingly enough, have rematches against their former teams this year. Titans and Steelers both set to play the Seahawks. With that, a new offense, you've got brand new receivers. And the real question here, I don't even think it's necessarily can JSN take the mantle as number one receiver, because I think we've already seen that. Second half of last year, Rob, I think he very much was Seattle's number one receiver. That's why he finished with 100 receptions last season to tie a team record that was previously held by Tyler Lockett. We saw him go out and make some big plays downfield, a bunch of touchdowns in the second half of the season. The real question, though, is about the rest of the group around him. Can Cooper Kupp find the fountain of youth in his first year in Seattle and play somewhat close to that triple crown winner that we saw in LA a few years ago? And the rest of this group, you got a lot of new faces, you got a lot of younger players that are going to have to really step up. Can this receiving core stay afloat with JSN and Cooper Kupp being the driving forces, a much different personnel group than what we've seen in the past at receiver for this football team?
Yeah, I think that's really well said, because I think there's an awful lot of Seahawks fans and maybe some national pundits as well who are just kind of imagining the Seahawks are going to be able to just kind of snap their fingers and be able to, replicate the success that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett had. As you just talked about, I mean, Tyler Lockett, of course, had that 100 catch season, the most catches ever in a single season. It's 109 career touchdown receptions that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett had that now just walked out of the building. And so are the Seahawks going to be able to, to replace that? I mean, that to me is as essential of a question as there is in all the conversations that we had to this point. Because I think even if Sam Darnold is good, even if the offensive line is improved and the running game gets going, if Seattle's lack of speed and playmaking ability at the wide receiver position doesn't actually help this offense really come together and get a rocking start to the season, everything else can basically fold away or fall apart like a deck of cards. So to me, this is a critical question here. And I do want to question JSN a little bit, because Corbin, with all due respect, I mean, obviously there was a game or two in which you didn't have Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf out there. And you'd argue that Tyler Lockett hasn't been playing at an exceptional level for a couple of years now. But still, the reality is the JSN in 2 seasons in the NFL only has 10 career touchdowns. This is not like some elite proven star. His longest play from scrimmage to this point is a 43-yarder. And again, one of my biggest concerns is I want to see the Seahawks have some wide receivers that can create after the catch. And JSN has shown that elite lateral agility. He is more physical than some of the bigger bodied receivers that have been on Seattle's roster, including the aforementioned DK Metcalf. But at the same time, he's never had to be the guy. And he certainly is going to be expected to be the guy now. And Cooper Kupp, you mentioned that Triple Crown season. I mean, that was 3 years ago. I mean, he's only had 2 seasons in his NFL career in which he's gone over the 1,000-yard receiving mark. And yet there's this national perception, again, that Cooper Kupp is just guaranteed production. He's a good player, but is at this point, at age 32, is he going to be able to be even a reliable number 2 guy? And again, he is not a guy that is known for creating a lot of yardage after the catch. So really, this is going to come down to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who, if you watch him, and this is a guy that can streak down the field. I mean, he is still the fastest receiver on Seattle's roster. If you go back to his combine time, 4.37 seconds on a 6'4" frame. I mean, that's certainly exciting, but he's kind of a one-trick and things of that nature. So the Cody Whites of the world, or the Derek Youngs, Jake Bobo, certainly. At the same time, I really think this is going to come down to, can the rookie and Horton really come up and be a big-time player for him. Torrey Horton, to me, has all the physical traits that you're looking for. As I mentioned, the straight line speed before MVS. With Torrey Horton, it's 4.41 seconds, and that's lightning, especially considering the fact that it was only a couple of weeks before the NFL Scouting Combine in which he was deemed eligible to run. He had been suffering from a knee injury and had to have a little bit of time before doctors cleared him. So this is clearly an electric athlete, but still, you're going to put an awful lot of pressure on a rookie to be able to make that kind of an impact. Now, I will say this, that the Seahawks selected Torrey Horton this past year 11 spots earlier than the Los Angeles Rams selected Puka Nacua 2 years ago. So there is precedent in the NFC West of day 3 wide receivers splashing as rookies. But at the same time, it's an awful lot of pressure. So in my opinion, Corbin, the essential question here is, do the Seahawks have enough firepower at the wide receiver position? I don't know that they do. In my opinion, wide receiver is the biggest area of concern for this club. It is the so-called Achilles heel, I guess, with all due respect to a couple of receivers on this club that have had some problems with lower leg injuries. But it is the position of concern, I think, most for the Seahawks entering the 2025 season.
I'm glad that you mentioned Torrey Horton, because I want to start my conversation with that particular player. We found out who ended up on the non-football injury list when rookies reported yesterday, and we knew Riley Mills was going to be one of the players coming off a torn ACL, but I thought there was a chance that Torrey Horton might be one of those players because he was coming off that knee hamstring injury that he suffered that caused him to undergo surgery, and he missed more than half his final season at Colorado State, and he didn't do a ton during OTAs and minicamp, but I think it's an incredibly encouraging thing. He was not one of the 6 players that ended up on the non-football injury list. And I think the 5 weeks or so in between the offseason program and start of camp really was that final step for him. And I think Seattle knew that they were going to have that time for him to really get right. So they didn't force the issue in offseason workouts. Let's get him right. Let's make sure he's ready to run those 4.3 times we know he's capable of and make plays downfield. Let's let him do that when he is 100% for the start of training camp. Now, this could be a situation that they're still going to need a couple weeks to really progress him to where he's getting all the reps that he's going to need. But I think that could end up being an incredibly beneficial situation for Seattle because they do need that field stretcher. And Torrey Horton is one of the few guys in this team at the receiver spot with sub 4.4 speed. And he was able to do it just coming off of that surgery. That's what makes it all the more impressive. He has wheels. He can win downfield. He's underrated creating after the catch. And you can see that on his punt and kick return ability as well. I think both he and Valdez-Scantling, to me, those are the X factors here. It isn't JSN or Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, even with some of the injuries he's had, he is still a high volume guy. He is going to give you a lot of receptions. He's going to move the chains. He's going to be a really solid possession receiver at minimum. You keep him healthy the whole season, you can get 1,000 yards out of him, 90 to 100 catches. No problem. I think JSN is trekking towards being one of the best receivers in the NFL. He's got that kind of upside, and I think this offense fits his strengths. But for this offense to really take off, and for those two receivers who, to me, Cooper Kupp being more so, is a possession receiver, I think you've got to have some guys that can really take pressure off of them by creating more opportunities, creating more space, taking the top off the defense. And that is where Valdes-Scantling and Torrey Horton, those are the two guys that really have the ability to do that. And then that opens things up for somebody like a Jake Bobo that I think is going to have potentially a bigger role. But there's a lot of question marks here, and I don't want to put pressure on Torrey Horton. I don't want to put pressure on Valdes-Scantling, who's been a 3 or a 4 receiver for most of his career. But I think this passing game is going to go as far as guys like that can help them go as far as their ceiling, being able to create those spaces for those underneath players like JSN and Cooper Kupp to be able to make the plays that we know they're capable of.
Yeah, that's really what's going to come down to. Is, again, Seattle's going to have to find some receiver besides JSN to kind of step up. Maybe that's going to be Kupp. I think that there is a good chance of that, but you're going to have a third pass catcher. That's just the way that the NFL goes. Now, the one player that we haven't talked about here that perhaps we should be is Elijah Arroyo, because, of course, he's listed as a tight end, played tight end at Miami, but the Seahawks kind of unprompted kind of talked about the possibility of moving him out wide. That's where he shined a little bit in some of those Senior Bowl practices that we know that the Seahawks hold in such high regard. So, again, it's going to be somebody is going to have to prove themselves to be a playmaker. And I think specifically the run after the catch ability is something that was lacking in the Seahawks the last several years, and that if they want to have more success in 2025, it's going to have to come back in droves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with Arroyo, because he could be the real wild card here, because he is that gadget player that you can move around, and he runs fluid enough to play the X position. That's why you take somebody like that in the second round. Health has been the biggest issue. Can you keep him on the field? Because I think if the Seahawks can do that, that gives them a really good chance to be able to get this passing game to that next level, where I don't think it's going to be as good as some of the teams we've had in recent years, but they're hoping it doesn't need to be, because they're going to be able to run the football better. But this is still a group. I agree with you. There's a lot of questions. We don't know what to expect. There is pressure on this group if this offense is going to be able to play at a playoff caliber level. They're going to need their receivers they have on the roster to step up. When we come back, speaking of stepping up, we're going to talk Mount Rushmore, the Seahawks Mount Rushmore here. And I'll tell you what, it was hard for me to pick just 4 players. And I know Rob had a lot of the same issues. We're going to talk about our selections and the composite pick from our Locked On Podcast Network, and discuss some of the decisions we had and some of the factors that went into those picks. That's going to be coming up next year on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions, fun ways to bet, especially during the dog days of baseball season as teams vie for playoff positioning. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. If I think Vlad Guerrero Jr. is going to start off the second half hot with a couple of home runs, I can bet on it without a hitch. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. And yes, I'm in a car. I kind of look like I'm one of the heads off of Mount Rushmore right now with the lighting here. Anyway, we're going to dive into our Mount Rushmore picks here. And those of you that follow us on YouTube, or if you're on social media, you have seen our Mount Rushmore, the composite one, because we are one of the shows that has 2 hosts, regular hosts. And both Rob and I, without knowing, it was private, we dished out our picks for who was going to be on our Mount Rushmore. and there were some differences. So we had to have kind of a composite selection for whose faces was going to be on that Mount Rushmore. And look, we're almost to when the real football starts, and the conversations like this are going to start to go into the void. But I think that this is a great time to dive into this going into the season, because this is a Seahawks franchise that has a lot of deserving names and a lot of deserving faces that could belong on Mount Rushmore in terms of Seahawks history. And I think the fact it's year 50 of the franchise makes it worth digging into this. And I want to start with our picks, because instead of showing the composite, which I'll show in a moment, I want to start with our picks. And for me, I had 8 or 9 players that I was considering for this, that I was strongly considering. And look, I had 2 of them that to me were 100% gimmies. But then I had 7 guys for 2 positions that I very much considered. And I ended up going with the 2 that I said are gimmies: Steve Largent, Walter Jones. 2 of the best players, not just in Seahawk history, but NFL history. Those 2 have absolutely got to be on there. For the other 2 spots, I went with more recent players. I picked Bobby Wagner, who leads the franchise in tackles, is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he hangs up his cleats. And then I went with Marshawn Lynch, and I'll explain why here in a little bit, because I know you've got a selection that might raise some eyebrows on your Mount Rushmore that is from the same era, those same Super Bowl teams.
Yeah, I that's really what I want to kind of come back to and kind of start the conversation off with. We all know Mount Rushmore, of course, is the mountain that has the faces of 4 different American presidents, and George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt. We know that 4 faces. 4 faces in Seahawks history, 50 years of really good football, obviously a Super Bowl championship team, couple of players that you just mentioned, a couple of them in Marshawn Lynch and Bobby Wagner, that are basically on the precipice of being in Canton as well. They were part of the 2010 All-Decade team as voted by AP voters in the Hall of Fame. So that's a clear indication that they are on their way to Canton. And a couple of other players that we're talking about here in a moment also were part of that 2010 All-Decade team. I think you can make an argument, Corbin, that there is no real argument here. Again, 4 faces on Mount Rushmore. There are 4 players in Seahawks history that played their entire NFL careers in Seattle and are already in the Hall of Fame, and that being Steve Largent, Walter Jones, Kenny Easley, and Cortez Kennedy. So when this ballot first came out, I'll be honest with you, I just thought, well, I'm going to write these 4 names down, I'll send it in, and that's that. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly, because obviously you're not representing the most successful time period in Seahawks history, the one where you actually won that damn ring, went to back-to-back Super Bowls, became basically the cover boys and women, I suppose, in some cases, of basically all of sports with those iconic memories of those big games. And so that's really where the conversation began for me. I really struggled with it. I took Kenny Easley off my list. I kept Cortez Kennedy on the list, and it just kills me as a scout to take Kenny Easley off the list. Let me just say that right off the bat, because from a scouting perspective, Kenny Easley might just be the best player in this team's history. I mean, he was an absolutely dominant player. But unfortunately, injuries took their toll on him. He retired at age 28, but he is in the Hall of Fame. He should at least be acknowledged in this. And then finally, I decided to go with Richard Sherman as far as the rest of the players from the more recent 2013, 2014 glory years in Seahawks history. And I think you can make an argument for a Bobby Wagner, for a Marshawn Lynch, hell, for a Pete Carroll, for a Russell Wilson, for a Mike Holmgren. There's so many great players. Dave Brown, if we're going to go with cornerback spot, Dave Brown's got a heck of a lot more interceptions for this franchise than Richard Sherman ever did. But there was no player, in my opinion, Corbin, who just epitomized the grit, the tenacity, the edge with which the Seahawks played throughout those Super Bowl glory days is Richard Sherman. I just think that when you look at his size, his tackling ability, his ball skills, I mean, he was just remarkable in some areas, and even amongst the great cornerbacks in NFL history, like we talked about before, Bobby Wagner and Marshawn Lynch. I mean, he was also in that 2010 All-Decade team, and so again, I think that he is going to be a Hall of Famer someday. I just think that this is a difficult conversation, but I had to represent the Legion of Boom and the Super Bowl team with one player. And if I was kind of forced to pick one player, for me, it was Richard Sherman as my 4th face on Seattle's Mount Rushmore team.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we had our composite, which was based on what you and I both turned in. And some of you, this might be the first time you've seen it, but here is the four that ended up making our Locked On Seahawks Mount Rushmore, combining our list because you and I both picked Steve Largent and Walter Jones. Those two are on here. And then you and I both got one player from the more recent era. And Marshawn Lynch ended up being the one from my list and Richard Sherman from yours. And that is our Mount Rushmore. And I'm going to say a lot of the same things about why I picked Marshawn Lynch that you did with Richard Sherman, because I felt like Marshawn Lynch was the heartbeat of those Legion of Boom teams. It wasn't the guys that were in the secondary. Not that those guys, obviously, there was heartbeat to the defense, but Marshawn Lynch, the Seahawks went as number 24 went. And you want to talk about iconic plays that people are going to be talking about. Obviously, the tip for Richard Sherman, Seahawks fans are going to be talking about that for eternity. But I don't know that any play is ever going to top the Beastquake to upset the Saints in 2010. And then he had a huge touchdown run that ended up knotting the game up in that miraculous comeback against the Packers in the NFC Championship game in 2014. 4 straight years where he had 1,200 rushing yards and absolutely was a touchdown machine, and he could catch the football, and just the way that he carried himself. Like, I know there are a lot of Seahawks fans that are thinking, well, look what he did in press conferences. I'm a reporter. Look, I know Marshawn pretty well now. I didn't get to cover most of his career as a reporter because I started in 2018, but he came back in 2019. So I got a little bit of a taste there, and I have a good relationship with Marshawn Lynch now. I've talked to him a lot. I can tell you the guys that played with him, he was a rock in that locker room. Everybody looked to him. He was the trendsetter. So to me, as hard as it was not to put Sean Alexander on here, because I think Sean Alexander, I've debated this for a long time. I think he is the most worthy Hall of Fame player that is not in the Hall of Fame for the Seattle Seahawks right now. Jacob Green would be a close second. I thought about Jacob Green for this. I mean, he was ranked 3rd in sacks in the NFL when he retired. So there's a lot of names you can throw out there. Cortez Kennedy, I think if you're just basing this off of individual players and you aren't considering the teams they played on stuff, he is clearly one of the 4 best Seahawks ever. I mean, he won a 1992 Defensive Player of the Year award on a team that won 2 games. I mean, who does that? Only Cortez Kennedy, because of just how dominant he was in the trenches. But it's not his fault, but he did not play consistently on even average teams. Marshawn Lynch, when he came to Seattle, suddenly the Seahawks became a problem for everybody. And he was that hammer. He was that trendsetter for the best time period, the best era in Seahawks history. So I had to have him. And Bobby Wagner, again, I think when it's all said and done, Bobby Wagner is the 2nd or 3rd best player in team history, in my opinion, with the numbers he put up, all the all-pros, and just how versatile of a player he was, just as an all-around linebacker. And then you look at what he's still doing now, 34 going on 35. I mean, he is just one of the best linebackers that we have ever seen. So I just rattled off all those names, Rob. Now we just kind of give an idea that there's different factors that go into this, that I think you could come up with a number of quartets, with the exception of the fact that any list that doesn't have Walter Jones or Steve Largent on it, I have to discard. Because to me, those two are the obvious. You have to have them on there.
Well, and that's the reason. One of the reasons why I went with Cortez Kennedy as well is I think that much the way that Steve Largent kind of epitomized the Seahawks franchise in the 70s and the 80s, and I'm old enough to have watched it. I mean, I was born 1976, the same year as the Seattle Seahawks, and I can't tell you that I watched every game in that initial season and remember as an infant, obviously, but I do have a little bit of perspective that maybe some of our valued listeners and viewers on podcasts and YouTube, the old school fans back in the Kingdom, I mean, they can't even spell podcast in some cases here, so I do think that perspective is important to acknowledge here. I love the fact that you mentioned Bobby Wagner specifically. I mean, My goodness, that was actually part of the argument for me not including it, is that Bobby Wagner's had such incredible success, both with the Los Angeles Rams and the Washington Commanders since leaving Seattle. And so to me, he's almost becoming bigger than the Seahawks. Whereas, and certainly Richard Sherman obviously had some success with a hated rival, the San Francisco 49ers, and actually spent a cup of coffee with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well. Again, I just think that I wanted to represent that iconic Super Bowl team with a player that I thought that, again, kind of epitomized the toughness. And again, I want to focus in on defense, because that to me was the strength of that squad. So again, I have a hard time arguing against any of these players. I strongly consider, as you mentioned, Jacob Green, Dave Brown, Pete Carroll, Mike Holmgren, again, lots of other players, Steve Hutchinson. Again, there has been some absolutely phenomenal players in this franchise's history, phenomenal executives and coaches. But I wanted to mention finally, one more about the late, great Cortez Kennedy. You mentioned that 1992 season, Corbin, and I think that, again, there's a lot of our listeners and viewers that don't know anything about the 1992 season, just how dreadful it was. I had to live through it, covering the team a little bit, and it was ridiculous. I mean, there was a 16-game season. The Seahawks scored a total of 13 touchdowns, and Cortez Kennedy won Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, it's just insane. They were
You're pouring a lot of salt in the wound right now,
goodness.
Rob.
They were so bad offensively, and they literally threw 9 touchdowns all season long. They scored 4 touchdowns on the ground. Chris Warren ran for 3 of those 4 touchdowns. Chris Warren, actually, one of the arguments against Marshawn Lynch is Chris Warren actually ran for more rushing yards than Marshawn Lynch did in his time in Seattle, as did Kurt Warner, as did the aforementioned Shaun Alexander. That was, again, part of the argument of why I didn't go with Marshawn Lynch, with all due respect to Beast Mode, who is among my favorite people in all of sports, hell, all of humanity, really. So again, I think your point's well made. I think that any list for me that doesn't include Cortez Kennedy, however, also is one that maybe it's lacking a little bit of perspective, because, again, the way that Steve Largent personified the Seahawks, the way that Walter Jones personified the Seahawks, whether it be Marshawn Lynch or Richard Sherman, I think that Cortez Kennedy absolutely personified the Seahawks and did so with great class on and off the field as well.
When we come back, we are down to numbers 20 through 16 on our 90-man countdown. We're going to dish out some thoughts on some really notable veterans that are coming back for the Seahawks in 2025. Don't go away. You're listening to Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We are now in the top 20 in our 90-man countdown, and we're starting to get to the nitty-gritty, the players that really are going to move the needle on what the Seahawks accomplish this season. So let's get to it here, Rob. Coming in at number 20 and at number 19, 2 players at different stages of their career. Boye Mafe at the end of his rookie contract. He's got millions of dollars at stake, whether as a Seahawk or elsewhere, on the line. Coming off a season where he had 6 sacks, was productive, but a hot start did not facilitate quite equal numbers to his sophomore season. And then coming in at 19, Gray Zabel hasn't played it down in the NFL, but it looks like he's going to be starting week 1 at left guard. And as a first-round pick, the Seahawks are hoping that he is able to come in and immediately help transform this offensive line. No pressure, young kid. You're getting chucked into the lineup, and a lot of turnover at guard over the years. Can Gray Zabel be the one that lives up to that first-round billing and really gets this offensive line to where it needs to be to win games, not just in the NFC West, but the playoffs? I think these 2 guys are incredibly important to this football team for different reasons. Boye Mafe, the Seahawks need him to find that level of play he had 2 years ago, or even exceed that. They need him to live up to his athletic billing as a guy that can really wreak havoc and get after the quarterback and finish plays. That has still been his biggest issue, is leaving too many sacks on the field. If he's able to fix that problem, he still could be a double-digit sack guy, and that would be huge for this defense to take another step forward. And obviously, Gray Zabel, with all the musical chairs the Seahawks have played at both guard spots. Again, no pressure, kid, coming from the FCS level. We expect you to come in and play at a really high level from day one. And I don't think John Benton's going to back away from those expectations. He thinks this kid can be really good right out of the gate.
Yeah, and all the evidence suggests that Gray Zabel is going to be really good out of the gate. I mean, obviously, he was a dominant player at the FCS level, and most importantly, was terrific at the Senior Bowl and at the testing. And so, again, you have an offensive line guru in John Benton, as well as Rick Dennison, and a proven offensive system under Clint Kubiak, all of which kind of tracks with Gray Zabel's athletic ability and versatility. So I do believe that he is going to experience a high level of success as a rookie. And obviously we're kind of plugging him at the left guard position, for good reason. But at the same time, it's also important to remember that the majority of his snaps at the college level were at that outside, at the tackle position, specifically left tackle. So while, obviously the left tackle position is set, at the same time, you like to have some versatility there. And so I do think that that is something worth acknowledging as well. Really quickly going back to Boye Mafe, I just think it's important to acknowledge, as you said, that he's entering the final year of his contract, that he, as we talked about before, he had 3 sacks in his first 3 games, suffers a knee injury, sits out 2 weeks, and in the final 12 games of last season, he only musters another 3 sacks. I think a fully healthy Boye Mafe is basically a shoe-in for 10 plus sacks, this upcoming season. Assuming Leonard Williams is able to do what he did as well, I think the two are going to be the most dynamic duo, maybe in all of the NFC this upcoming season. And that is a big reason, again, why I think that the Seahawks are going to be a real contender in the NFC.
The next 2 players on our list at 18 and 17, they're going to see some action playing next to each other as they have the last couple of years. Obviously, Abraham Lucas has been battling a lot of knee issues the last 2 seasons, limited to a handful of games, and he hasn't been quite himself. He did look more like the Abe Lucas that we saw his rookie season last year, but he even said he still had kind of a flat tire late in the season. That is not the case now going into 2025. We have talked about this ad nauseum. He is as fit and ripped of a 6'5", 325-pound man as you're going to see. He was moving really well. We saw the dancing bear return during OTAs and minicamp. He just looked like the guy that we saw his rookie year. I think that is an absolute game changer for the Seahawks. And I've said this a couple times, and I'm sticking with it. I don't think that there is a player that has more of a chance to really elevate the ceiling for this Seahawks team than a healthy Abraham Lucas. I think if you have him healthy for most, if not all the season, and he is playing at the level he's capable of, I think he's got all pro talent. If he's out there for 16, 17 games, mauling dudes and getting out in space as the really good move blocker that he is, it transforms this team. We saw the run game come to life when he was in the lineup at less than 100% last year. His pass protection ability, I think Abe Lucas moves the needle in terms of ceiling more than anybody on Seattle's offense. And then the X factor here in Noah Fant, who, again, he's played some snaps in line, but mostly has been a guy that plays kind of that H-back or slot role. He's more of a receiving tight end. And because Elijah Arroyo has been brought in, I think there's a lot of fans that have kind of put Noah Fant off to the side a little bit and said, he's in his last year of his contract, probably isn't going to get a lot of opportunities. I'm going to pull Lee Corso here. Not so fast, my friend. I think when you look at this offense that Clint Kubiak runs, I feel like we've been saying this the last couple of years. Well, this offense is going to get the tight end involved more. Look, Ryan Grubb did not do that last year away from A.J. Barn or having some red zone success. They did not do near good enough job of getting their tight ends involved in the passing game. Clint Kubiak's got an incredible track record, even in just a few years as an offensive coordinator, of getting multiple tight ends involved. They're going to run a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets, and he's going to really look to take the skill set that Noah Fant has. He's going to really do whatever he can to maximize on his ability to stretch the field and be able to create, because he's done it in spurts. We have seen the ability to create big plays, just not enough. And obviously the touchdown numbers have been incredibly disappointing, but I'm not putting all that on Noah Fant. He's another guy. I'm not putting at the same level as Abe Lucas, but if Noah Fant could go out and give you 600 receiving yards and score some damn touchdowns, that is a chance to be a real game changer again for Clint Kubiak's offense.
Yeah, starting off real quick with Noah Fant, I think as we talked about before with the wide receiver position, Seattle needs guys who are going to be able to create after the catch. Noah Fant has the size, the speed, enough agility to be able to do so. He's got to more consistently use his power. He's bigger than any of the defensive backs that are going to be trying or be tasked with covering him. He's got to kind of remember that kind of mentality. You see flashes of it, similar to the way that we saw flashes of it back in the day with, say, a Jimmy Graham or some of the other athletic tight ends that the Seahawks have had in the past. I just think that the Seahawks need to kind of feature him a little bit more. He's got to play with a little bit more of the hunger and the desire. We saw that impressive touchdown that he had a year ago, tumbling into the end zone, basically got the legs cut out from under him, but still maintained his concentration to haul in that touchdown. There are signs with Noah Fant. And again, as you said, Corbin, I just think that the offense could absolutely explode if they are able to get Noah Fant really humming the way that his first-round pedigree suggests that he could. And I 100% echo your sentiments when it comes to Abraham Lucas. I think that was one of the more underrepresented storylines nationally concerning the Seahawks a year ago. When Abe Lucas went down and the replacement for him, George Fant, went down, and Seattle basically had turnstile at the right tackle position, that's really where everything fell apart a year ago. If Abraham Lucas is back and healthy again, I think that the Seahawks have the makings of one of the better, or at least the more improved offensive lines in all of the NFC. And just that change alone can take this team deep into the playoffs.
And I think the player on defense, I mentioned the ceiling elevator. To me, Abraham Lucas is that guy on offense. I don't think it's debatable on defense either. Byron Murphy II, to me, is the guy that can take this defense to another level because he had half a sack last year. He had 2 quarterback hits as a 16th overall pick. Now, we've talked about this a bunch. You turn on the tape, I don't see a guy that looks like he was that poor. I see a guy that was way better than his raw stats are going to indicate, and he was 8th among defensive linemen in pass rush win rate on true pass stats, according to Pro Football Focus. The tape backs that up. You saw a lot of examples where he was able to penetrate the pocket, and he won at the line of scrimmage. But he didn't get near enough chances, particularly from the 3-tech spot, to rush the passer and really pin his ears back and use that former running back athleticism that he has at 300 pounds. I think Mike McDonald, that is going to be one of his biggest focal points on this defense this year. How can I utilize and accentuate Byron Murphy II's athleticism better and put him in more positions where he can wreak havoc as a pass rusher? If you could get 4 or 5 sacks out of Byron Murphy II and a bunch more QB hits and a similar pressure rate to go with what Leonard Williams gives you, the rest of that D-line, it's like Abe Lucas. To me, he is that guy that can take what's already really good defense. If Byron Murphy II takes a big jump, that's what is going to elevate this team to potentially being a top 1 or 2 defense in the entire NFL this year.
Yeah, I'm so excited about Byron Murphy II's just athletic ability. I mean, just the explosiveness for his frame, that stubby frame that gives him just a natural leverage advantage inside. I think that he is one of the guys who is just kind of uniquely built that might be able to help, say, Seattle against, like, say, the Philadelphia Eagles tush push, for example, and other 4th and short kind of situations or goal line situations. The Seahawks aren't asking him to necessarily be that 2-gapping run stuffer. They're asking him to play a little bit of the gaps and be able to show off that explosive quickness and power. And again, considering the fact that Seattle has so many other quality big men up front, obviously Leonard Williams, but also Jaron Reed and Jonathan Hankins, especially that trio of veterans, I really think that you can expect to see a pretty significant growth from Byron Murphy II, perhaps similar to what we saw with Derek. Now I'm spacing on
Derek Hall.
Yep, Derek Hall on the outside a year ago. And so, again, similar to Derek Hall, you see the physicality, you see the explosiveness, you see the desire. I think the Seahawks just gambled on a very, very young player in Byron Murphy, and that this is the year where you're going to start to see it come to more of a statistical fruition.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we have our first ever Locked On Podcast Top 100 Players ranking. I'm going to be diving into those rankings and looking at which Seahawks made the list and which Seahawks I believe got snubbed. And there's definitely going to be a few that I'm going to mention. Should be a really fun episode with more of a league-centric view with a heavy Seahawks spin on it. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.